A woman once woke up after her hysterectomy and felt like something was really wrong. It was like something bad had happened to her, but she couldn't quite tell what it was. Days later, when she met with her surgeon, she asked him if he'd seen anything unusual in his pelvis. He told her he didn't see anything unusual and that the medical students who had done the pelvic exam on her were very gentle. She was as shocked as you probably are. She wasn't aware that someone other than the surgeon was going to do a pelvic exam on her when she was unconscious under anesthesia. You're going to learn about gynecological surgeries and what happens to women's consent to what happens to their bodies. And most importantly, I'm going to share 4 things you need to ask before you go under anesthesia for any gynecological surgery. So in just a few minutes, you're going to know more about what happens in women's surgery than most women having that surgery. We'll first talk about the history of informed consent and pelvic exams on unconscious women. Then we'll talk about how PTSD can happen to patients even when they're under anesthesia. And we'll end with those 4 questions that you need to ask your doctors before you go under anesthesia. And this is a very sensitive topic, so please be respectful in your comments below. The difference between being violated under anesthesia and being helped under anesthesia lies in your expectations and what you consented to. Over 40 million pelvic exams are performed under anesthesia every year. And 84% of medical students report performing at least 1 pelvic exam during their training. But did patients always know what was happening to their bodies? It's believed the idea of informed consent was formalized in a landmark trial in 1914. It was between Schlondorf and the Society of New York Hospitals. Judge Benjamin Cardoza famously wrote that a patient has the fundamental right to determine what shall be done with his own body. Before this, it was argued that pelvic exams under anesthesia were essential components of gynecological surgery, and that medical student involvement was implicitly agreed to in the agreement with the hospital. They argued that these exams were comparable to other medical procedures, and some argued that requiring explicit informed consent might limit educational opportunities for trainees. Now, you should all agree that this is outdated thinking. In modern medicine, we practice with autonomy for patient decision-making, requiring that patients be allowed to choose not to be cared for or treated by trainees when it does not compromise patient safety. Informed consent is essential to protect patient autonomy, ensure transparency, and foster ethical training environments. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, or ACOG for short, now recommends that trainees only perform pelvic exams under anesthesia when patients have provided explicit consent for participation, the examination is relevant to the surgical procedure, the patient recognizes the trainee as part of their care team, and the exam is performed under direct doctor supervision. Current data shows that most medical schools, around 80%, now have policies requiring explicit informed consent for medical students to perform pelvic exams under anesthesia. We don't know exactly how many pelvic exams are performed under anesthesia by medical students without explicit informed consent, but we have some interesting numbers. Among medical students who perform pelvic exams under anesthesia, only 42% consistently observed informed consent practices. And of those who did observe consent, 67% never or rarely witnessed explicit explanation that a medical student might perform the examination. In a Canadian study, among medical students who had performed pelvic exams under anesthesia, 28% were unsure if informed consent ever took place. 26% reported no specific consent, and 25% had mixed experiences of consent, meaning only 20% reported specific consent. These are by no means definitive numbers because the informed consent process may have taken place outside of the observation context in these studies, but they demonstrate the importance of speaking up for yourself when you're the patient before a procedure, especially if you're going to have your memory scrambled before a sensitive surgery. So this is where things get weird with anesthesia because it blocks your memory formation. It scrambles your memories, but it doesn't mean that little bits of information can't still leak in. Your hearing is the most resistant sense to anesthesia, meaning that you might hear things if your anesthesia is relatively underdosed. It's why the most common recollection from patients who have anesthesia awareness is hearing things. On top of that, and it should come as no surprise, that in my experience over 10,000 anesthetics, I found the genital area to be very sensitive to touch, meaning a patient might jump or react to even the slightest stimulation in that part of the body. So while your hearing is the most resistant sense to anesthesia, sensation down in your genitalia is also exquisitely sensitive even under anesthesia. It doesn't mean anything was done wrong if a patient jumps or reacts to being stimulated down in their genitals, because that can be a normal response if the anesthesia is just even a hair too light. But if a patient wasn't expecting that to happen to their body, they may wake up with some unusual feelings and not be able to pinpoint what happened because the anesthesia scrambled the memories even though their body still experienced something it wasn't expecting, something it hadn't consented to. They may have feelings of arousal or even acute stress disorder. And unfortunately, because they don't remember the inciting incident, they might not be able to tell their doctors or tell a therapist. And most therapists and doctors don't know to ask about the risks of anesthesia awareness. Fortunately, anesthesia awareness is vanishingly rare in most normal elective surgeries in healthy people, but the consequences can be devastating if not identified early. And it requires prompt psychiatric intervention as soon as it's recognized. Research on awareness during anesthesia demonstrates that approximately 15% of patients who experienced unexpected explicit recall of events during sedation or regional anesthesia were diagnosed with PTSD, with about 40% experiencing persistent psychological sequelae. The risk appears substantially elevated in women with prior trauma exposure. Women with histories of sexual violence who also have PTSD may experience significantly more fear, distress, and embarrassment during pelvic examinations, especially compared to women without these histories. It's because the central nervous system might experience that examination as similar to the prior trauma it experienced, particularly among sexual violence survivors. I've done many videos on being awake under anesthesia. You can learn more by watching the videos I've linked below on this phenomena. So while the results can be devastating, fortunately, anesthesia awareness is vanishingly rare in modern medicine, but I want you to take the right steps to prepare your mind so that even if something unusual happens, you don't get as hurt by it. Before we get to those 4 important questions you need to ask your surgeon, remember to share what you're learning with your loved ones, especially if they're having surgery, so you can help put their mind at ease. Because it's okay to be the squeaky wheel when it comes to your health and medicine. So let me know your comments below and hit that like button. We can all agree that medical students need to learn medicine, and the medical system should allow them to learn without compromising patient autonomy, especially when those patients are unconscious. Medical students simply can't learn what disease looks like or feels like when practicing on healthy actors. So there is a role for performing exams on real-life patients with direct supervision from experienced doctors. And when a patient is under anesthesia, it's less uncomfortable. And generations of doctors and their subsequent patients have benefited from this practice. And I'm thrilled that federal rules and several state laws require informed consent specifically for these pelvic exams under anesthesia. And there are penalties like medical board disciplinary actions or misdemeanor charges. That all being said, I care about your safety, so while these rules are meant to protect you, you still need to advocate for yourself. So here are the 4 questions you always need to ask before you go under anesthesia. Number 1, ask if that pelvic exam is necessary or relevant for the surgery or procedure you're having. Number 2, ask to view the consent form that specifically describes student or trainee participation. Number 3, before you fall asleep, ask to meet the whole team who's going to be in the operating room with you. Know what their roles are and what they're going to do and not do. And number 4, specifically ask if any pelvic exams will be performed while you're unconscious and who's going to be supervising. I recommend you ask these questions before the IV goes in, so it's one less thing on your mind before you get poked, which is already a stressful part before you even walk in the room. It also gives the surgery team time to introduce themselves before you get rushed into the room to fall asleep. Fortunately, the risk of being violated under anesthesia in gynecological surgeries appears very, very low. That being said, I want you in the driver's seat so that you can have more confidence and feel more in control. The more confident and in control you feel, the more smoothly surgery and anesthesia may go. And smoother surgery means safer surgery. When I was a medical student at Stanford, I never thought I would have to advocate so strongly for women's health in the future. But I've learned that women's health seriously lacks good research, especially around hormone replacement. You should check out this video here for why hormone replacement therapy isn't optional for many women. It can actually be life-saving, but most doctors don't know about this and don't know how to treat their patients going through these life transitions. So you'll learn a lot from this video. You can also check out my San Francisco clinic's website, www.claris-health.com, to learn more about my approach to women's health and longevity. Let me know what else you want to learn about in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of my medical advocacy content. And remember, you have more power over your health than you've probably ever been told.